Hello everyone and welcome to my channel Y&R Trends. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Phyllis had always been one step ahead, or so she thought, weaving her web of manipulation and schemes with the precision of a master puppeteer, believing that her AI-driven escape plan would finally give her the ultimate edge over everyone in Genoa City. But as she meticulously executed each phase of her intricate plan, from hacking into corporate servers to creating digital diversions that would mislead investigators, she underestimated the one person who had been quietly observing her movements all along: Lily Winters, whose sharp instincts and unyielding sense of justice had been quietly gathering the pieces of Phyllis's puzzle like a detective in a high-stakes thriller. And on that fateful day when Phyllis believed she had successfully secured her freedom and eliminated any trace of her misdeeds, Lily made her move, revealing not only the depth of Phyllis's AI manipulation but also the personal betrayals and ethical compromises that the scheme entailed. And as Phyllis's carefully constructed digital fortress began to unravel, her sense of invincibility shattered like glass against stone, forcing her to confront the stark reality that her own hubris and underestimation of Lily's capabilities had been her undoing. And it all began earlier that morning when Phyllis, cloaked in the confidence of her technological mastery, sent out encrypted instructions to her AI system, designed to manipulate stock trades, redirect surveillance feeds, and create phantom alibis that would confuse the authorities and her rivals alike, thinking she had left no trail, no loophole. But Lily, aware of Phyllis's penchant for underestimating those she deemed weaker or less cunning, had been monitoring unusual network activity and digital signatures, quietly tracing the origin points back to Phyllis's hidden devices. And as the day progressed, while Phyllis moved through Genoa City with her usual polished demeanor, attending meetings, charming former allies, and making subtle manipulations to ensure her plans remained undetected, Lily methodically gathered evidence, compiling screenshots, server logs, and even subtle behavioral patterns of Phyllis that revealed inconsistencies in her timeline. Knowing that the moment she confronted Phyllis needed to be flawless, undeniable, and catastrophic to Phyllis's ambitions, and the confrontation finally came in a sleek, tension-filled boardroom at Newman Enterprises, where Phyllis, expecting to bask in her victory over her unsuspecting rivals, was met with Lily standing firm, files and tablets in hand, a calm but resolute glare that immediately set Phyllis on edge, the air thick with anticipation and the electric hum of accusation, as Lily systematically unveiled the layers of Phyllis's AI plot, starting with the innocuous-looking manipulations of the company's data streams, escalating to the more sinister financial exploits, and finally revealing the ethical violations and personal betrayals that Phyllis had attempted to hide from everyone who trusted her, including manipulating employees, exploiting personal relationships, and even attempting to sabotage the careers of those who had once considered her a friend or ally. And as each revelation unfolded, Phyllis's composed facade began to crack, a flicker of panic betraying the calm exterior she had so carefully cultivated, and she realized, with a sinking feeling in her gut, that every precaution she had taken, every clever algorithm, every digital smoke screen, had been anticipated and countered by Lily's meticulous detective work, and the room seemed to shrink around her as the implications of her exposure hit, knowing that not only would her AI-driven advantage be nullified but also that the scandal would ripple through the corridors of power in Genoa City, tarnishing her reputation, endangering alliances, and potentially leading to legal consequences. And as the weight of the moment pressed down, Phyllis tried to salvage the situation, her voice laced with false charm and deflection, attempting to negotiate, to manipulate Lily's sense of empathy or reason. But Lily, resolute and unwavering, methodically dismantled each excuse, each half-truth, exposing the calculated cruelty and deception behind Phyllis's actions. And with the last of the evidence laid bare, a hush fell over the room. Employees and board members who had gathered in stunned silence now whispering and exchanging glances, realizing the extent of Phyllis's betrayal, the AI plot that had seemed like the ultimate power move now appearing as a desperate, reckless gamble. And Phyllis, realizing her escape plan had failed utterly, felt the crushing weight of isolation and impending accountability, a stark contrast to the confident, untouchable persona she had displayed mere hours before. And in the aftermath, as security and legal advisors began assessing the fallout, Phyllis's mind raced through damage control strategies, but each potential maneuver was undercut by the airtight evidence Lily had provided, leaving her trapped in a web of her own making. facing the reality that no amount of charm, manipulation, or technological wizardry could undo the revelation that had been meticulously orchestrated against her. And as the day turned to night, Phyllis sat alone in her office, staring at screens that now displayed not the fruits of her genius but the stark documentation of her failure, reflecting on the irony that in trying to outsmart everyone, she had underestimated Lily, the very person she had dismissed as secondary, a miscalculation that now loomed larger than any algorithm or scheme she had devised, and the city, buzzing with whispers of the scandal, would soon learn that Phyllis's reputation, her influence, and her carefully curated power had been fundamentally shaken, all because a single adversary, patient, intelligent, and unflinching, had dared to expose the truth, proving that even the most sophisticated AI-driven plot could not withstand the insight, determination, and moral compass of someone who refused to be manipulated. And in that moment, Phyllis realized that the ultimate lesson of her downfall was not just about the limits of technology or cunning, but the human element she had ignored, the unquantifiable, unpredictable force of conscience, courage, and intellect embodied by Lily. And as the first whispers of her exposure spread through the city, the consequences began to manifest in real time. Allies who had once flocked to her side distanced themselves, clients questioned her integrity, and even her family began to grapple with the shock of her audacious betrayal, and Phyllis, watching it all unfold, understood the bitter irony that her genius, once her greatest asset, had become her most visible vulnerability, a monument to overconfidence and strategic arrogance. And yet, even in the face of failure, a flicker of her old defiance remained, a reminder that Phyllis Abbott was not a woman to be forgotten or easily subdued. Even as the walls closed in, the consequences of her AI plot would linger, reshaping her relationships, her status, and her future in ways she had never fully anticipated. And so, as the night deepened over Genoa City, Phyllis's mind raced, weighing possibilities, assessing damage, plotting contingencies, yet knowing with an unsettling clarity that the escape plan she had relied upon so heavily had crumbled, leaving her exposed, accountable, and utterly humbled, while Lily, steadfast and vigilant, had not only thwarted a scheme but also reinforced the principle that integrity, intelligence, and perseverance could outmatch even the most sophisticated deception. And in that long, tense, and unforgettable day, the city witnessed a story of ambition, betrayal, and revelation that would reverberate through the halls of Newman Enterprises and beyond, reminding everyone that in a world of power plays and corporate intrigue, no plan, no matter how cleverly engineered or technologically advanced, could ever fully escape the scrutiny of a determined adversary, and Phyllis's AI-driven empire of manipulation lay in ruins, a testament to overreach, hubris, and the enduring power of vigilance, justice, and human insight, a dramatic lesson that would echo across Genoa City, reshaping the lives, loyalties, and futures of all involved. And even as Phyllis contemplated the next move, the lingering sting of exposure, the collapse of her plans, and the inescapable gaze of those who had seen through her deception served as a stark reminder that while technology can be a tool of power, it can never replace the unpredictable, indomitable force of human intelligence, courage, and moral conviction. And in the shadow of this failure, a new chapter began for everyone entwined in the fallout, setting the stage for redemption, reckoning, and the ongoing drama that defined life in Genoa City, where every action, every secret, and every revelation had consequences. And Phyllis, confronted with the undeniable proof of her AI plot's collapse, had no choice but to face the reality that sometimes, the most brilliant plans are undone not by the systems we control, but by the people we underestimate, the ones whose patience, insight, and tenacity ultimately triumph over even the most elaborate schemes. And as the dust settled, the narrative of Phyllis's downfall became a cautionary tale whispered through the corridors of Newman Enterprises, a story of ambition, betrayal, and the unassailable power of truth, exposed by Lily Winters, whose unwavering determination had turned a potentially catastrophic manipulation into a resounding victory for justice, accountability, and the fragile yet potent moral fabric that held Genoa City together. And as Phyllis pondered her next move, the lessons of the day were painfully clear. Overconfidence can blind, deception can unravel, and no AI, no matter how sophisticated, can outmatch the insight, resolve, and integrity of a single determined adversary, leaving her to navigate the fallout, repair relationships, and face the consequences of a failed escape plan that had begun with ambition and hubris and ended with exposure, reckoning, and the inescapable truth that in the world of the young and the restless, No one is untouchable. No plan is foolproof, and every action carries the weight of inevitable consequences. Even as Phyllis sat in her office, the glow of the city lights casting long shadows across her sleek, modern furniture, she could not shake the gnawing sense of inevitability that had begun the moment Lily had exposed her AI plot. And every ping of her phone, every notification, every whispered rumor in the hallways of Newman Enterprises reminded her that she was no longer in control, that the intricate web of manipulation she had spun with meticulous care had unraveled faster than she could comprehend, and as the hours passed, messages from allies who had once lauded her ingenuity now carried thinly veiled suspicions or outright accusations, reminding her that trust, once broken, was almost impossible to mend, and while she had anticipated resistance, she had never imagined the scale of the fallout, the way that a single exposure could cascade through personal relationships, professional alliances, and public perception, creating a chain reaction that left even the most loyal of supporters questioning their loyalties and motives. And Phyllis, for the first time in years, felt the sting of vulnerability, a sensation she had long associated with the weakness of others, never herself, and it was compounded when her family, those whose love and loyalty she had taken for granted, began confronting her about the ethical breaches, the manipulations and the betrayals, forcing her to confront not just the failure of her AI plan, but the moral bankruptcy of her actions. Realization that left her reeling in a cocktail of anger, shame and disbelief, and as she paced the office, her mind raced through alternative strategies, contingency plans and potential cover stories, but each idea was met with the cold, immutable truth of Lily's evidence, airtight, comprehensive, and devastating, and she realized that the very technology she had wielded as a weapon against the world had now become her prison, a digital trap that exposed every misstep, every calculation, every deception to scrutiny, leaving her no avenue for escape, no room for maneuver, no path to redemption without significant sacrifice, and the irony was bitter. Phyllis Abbott, master manipulator, innovator, and strategist, had been undone not by an enemy more cunning than herself, but by someone she had dismissed, underestimated, and in her arrogance, assumed would never unravel the threads she had spent months weaving, and the weight of this realization settled like a stone in her chest, heavy, immovable and inescapable, as the first waves of public reaction began to hit, the media picking up on rumors of corporate sabotage, AI manipulation, and ethical violations, painting Phyllis as both a villain and a cautionary tale, a narrative that spread like wildfire through Genoa City, reaching clients, competitors and allies alike, all of whom began recalibrating their relationships with her, assessing risks and reconsidering partnerships, leaving Phyllis in a precarious position of influence stripped bare, her power diminished, her reputation tarnished, and her future uncertain. And yet, even as the chaos swirled around her, Phyllis's mind refused to rest, spinning with possibilities, analyzing weaknesses, recalculating probabilities, and imagining scenarios in which she could regain some semblance of control, even if only through subtle manipulations, psychological tactics, or leveraging knowledge she alone possessed. But every potential move was countered by the harsh reality that Lily had anticipated every angle, covering herself with preemptive measures that made any countermove by Phyllis a potential disaster, a misstep that could worsen her already precarious situation. And as she considered her options, memories of past betrayals, past manipulations, and past victories flitted through her mind, each one a reminder of her brilliance, but now also a haunting reflection of her hubris, for in each previous victory, she had underestimated no one, controlled every variable, and emerged triumphant. But this time, the complexity of human insight and moral vigilance had proven a stronger force than algorithms, surveillance, or deceit, and in that moment, Phyllis realized that her greatest adversary was not the technology she had created, but the resilience and intelligence of those around her, especially Lily, whose patient, methodical, and morally grounded approach had exposed Phyllis's vulnerabilities and laid bare the consequences of her overreach. And as the night stretched on, Phyllis faced another sobering reality. The consequences of her exposure would not remain contained to Newman Enterprises or her immediate sphere, but would ripple outward, affecting partners, clients, employees, and even family members who had unwittingly become pawns in her schemes, and the thought of innocent people suffering collateral damage because of her ambition filled her with an unfamiliar, uncomfortable emotion, one she had long avoided. Guilt, a gnawing reminder that while genius can accomplish remarkable feats, It is tempered by responsibility, foresight, and ethical consideration, and in that tension between brilliance and conscience, power and morality, Phyllis found herself at a crossroads, forced to consider not only the immediate tactical consequences of her failed AI plan, but the long-term implications for her identity, reputation, and relationships. And as dawn approached, the first rays of sunlight creeping across the skyline of Genoa City, Phyllis made a series of calls, each one a calculated attempt to contain damage, mend bridges, and gather information, but the responses she received underscored the magnitude of her predicament, with allies expressing cautious distance, employees revealing uncertainty, and rivals subtly exploiting her weakened position. And in those conversations she was reminded that manipulation, once exposed, loses its potency, leaving the manipulator vulnerable, defenseless, and open to counteractions that can escalate quickly. And as the day unfolded, Phyllis observed the unfolding chaos with a mixture of frustration and grudging respect, for Lily's strategy was flawless, her exposure surgical in precision, and even as Phyllis contemplated her next moves, she realized that she could no longer rely solely on cunning, charm, or technology, but would have to navigate a complex web of human emotions, alliances, and consequences, a terrain far more unpredictable than any algorithm could model. And the challenge was compounded when unexpected parties became involved. Victor Newman, always attuned to power shifts and influence, began asking pointed questions, subtly probing for weaknesses and alliances, while Nikki and Jack weighed in with their own assessments, their concern mixed with curiosity, and even Ashley, normally detached, sensed the implications for corporate integrity and ethical oversight, creating a multi-layered pressure that left Phyllis scrambling to maintain composure while internally strategizing damage control, spin, and contingency plans. But no matter how she recalibrated her approach, the underlying truth remained. Her AI plot had been fully exposed, her control compromised, and the city had seen her vulnerability. And as the news spread, whispers among employees, socialites, and business associates created an almost palpable tension in every interaction, every glance, every conversation, reinforcing the isolation Phyllis felt, in stark contrast to the dominance she had once wielded with ease. And the psychological toll of that exposure manifested in restless nights, overanalyzed meetings, and a growing awareness that every word, every gesture, and every move was now scrutinized for potential missteps, leaving her with little room for error. And yet, within that pressure cooker environment, Phyllis's resilient spirit refused to be extinguished, and despite the humiliation, the loss of trust, and the erosion of influence, she began to plot incrementally, cautiously, and with far greater respect for the intelligence, patience, and morality of her adversaries, particularly Lily, whose victory was as much about timing, insight, and ethical grounding as it was about exposure. And as Phyllis considered her next steps, she realized that any attempt to regain her footing would require more than traditional manipulation or technology. It would require psychological acumen, political savvy, and perhaps most importantly, a reinvention of herself in the public and private spheres, a transformation that would need to balance ambition with humility, cunning with accountability, and power with ethical awareness. And as she began drafting preliminary plans, she reflected on the irony that her downfall had been orchestrated not through brute force, deception, or intimidation, but through patience, intelligence, and moral vigilance, a lesson that cut deeper than any legal or professional repercussion. And as the days turned into weeks, the fallout of the failed AI plot continued to reverberate, reshaping alliances, redefining reputations, and forcing every player in Genoa City to reassess their positions, loyalties, and perceptions of power, while Phyllis, ever the strategist, worked behind the scenes to reclaim what she could, understanding now that the path to recovery would be long, fraught with obstacles, and contingent on navigating a labyrinth of human emotion, ethics, and perception. And in that ongoing struggle, she found a strange clarity, that the true measure of influence was not the sophistication of one's schemes, the power of one's technology, or the audacity of one's ambition, but the ability to anticipate, respect, and respond to the unpredictable, resilient, and morally grounded actions of others, exemplified in the steadfast determination of Lily Winters, whose intervention had not only prevented a technological catastrophe, but had also reaffirmed the enduring principle that integrity, intelligence, and moral vigilance are forces that even the most brilliant manipulations cannot entirely overcome. And so, as Phyllis mapped out her next moves, she did so with an acute awareness that every decision would be scrutinized, every action potentially countered, and every interaction could tip the balance between resurgence and further decline, a reality that would shape her ambitions, her strategies, and her relationships for months, perhaps years to come. And in the shadow of this epic exposure, one truth remained undeniable. In Genoa City, as in life, power, ambition, and technology are only as effective as the humans around you allow them to be, and Phyllis Abbott, for all her brilliance, had learned the hardest lesson of all, that even the most elaborate AI plot, no matter how meticulously executed, can be undone by patience, intelligence, and ethical insight, a lesson that would echo through her life, her legacy, and the corridors of Newman Enterprises, long after the immediate chaos had faded into memory.